Olyssa Starry. I'm a graduate student at the University of Maryland, and the title of my talk is Monitoring and Modeling Stormwater Retention Efficiency by Greenroofs for different climate and planting scenarios. So today I'm going to discuss the urban stream syndrome and how roofs contribute to this phenomenon. I'll talk about green roofs as a new emerging roof design that can address some aspects of the urban stream syndrome. I'll go over my research on experimental green roofs and how I've been monitoring them. And I'll also discuss how I've been using this monitoring information to create a green roof model. And I'll talk about some of the advantages of working on a green roof model, and hopefully there'll be a chance for feedback and questions as well. So the urban stream syndrome basically refers to the phenomenon that happens when it rains in cities and all of the water basically runs off our urban hardscapes, gathering really quickly and acting almost like an avalanche, forcing water into our streams. And because of this really rapid push of water over the surface, we get decreased infiltration, what's often referred to as flashy hydrology, changes in stream chemistry and ecology, and also changes in the stream channel. And this is a really common phenomena that you'll see when you look at our urban streams after rains. You'll notice a lot of them look like this. They get full of trash and they just don't look too great. And what we're realizing is that impervious surface is a major driver of the urban stream syndrome, and roofs contribute contribute to this impervious surface. I did a little study of a watershed near where I live in Maryland, the Glendon watershed, and you can see here I've highlighted all of the buildings in this watershed in gray, and the ones in green are the ones that have a slope that would be suitable, make them suitable to green roofs. So they're possible. Not only do roofs contribute to this impervious surface, roofs are also pretty toxic, especially some of the roofs in Baltimore that are built with tar paper. And here you can see from this type of roof that was studied in Europe by a researcher named Foster, a lot of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons were found in the roof runoff. So another way to design roofs is called a green roof. I'm going to go over, not a lot of people are familiar with them, so I'm going to go over some basic information about green roofs. There are all sorts of different types. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to either extensive or intensive green roofs, and that has to do with the thickness of the roof. And you can see there's a bunch of different cutoff points that are described, but basically if you think of a green roof as being less than 4 inches, then you might want to call it extensive. And if it's a little bit more than that, then we start thinking of those roofs as intensive. I work primarily with the extensive types of green roofs. And even within that category, there are a variety of different green roof types. So it depends on how your green roof is put together. If your green roof is put together in little pieces, it's a modular green roof, like that picture that you see on the left. That's a picture of a USDA building in Washington, D.C. And you can see that green roof is just put together with little bags. Sometimes the green roofs are rolled out, as in the picture in the middle. And sometimes you have a single course green roof. And my research addresses mostly that last green roof type, the single course extensive green roof. So what's underneath those plants there on that extensive single course green roof? Here's a little diagram that was put together. You can find it at that website that I've referenced, and you can see basically on top of your roof structural support, there's usually a rubber roofing membrane, and you don't want that rubber roofing membrane to get punctured, so a lot of times they'll put a protective barrier on top of that. Insulation is often even installed on top of that. Then you'll have a drainage layer, possibly some filter fabric, a growing medium that we like to call a substrate. It's not a regular soil that you would find in nature. It's a constructed substrate, and it usually consists of a lightweight material like a baked slate or a baked clay, and then that substrate is planted, usually with a drought-tolerant species. People are experimenting more and more with native species, but a lot of the early green roofs adopted the same sort of planting template as the older green roofs in Europe, and those green roofs have sedum plants. Here's an example of the type of green roof that you would find in Germany. This is by a famous this roof was designed by a famous Austrian architect. Sorry, there's a mosquito. But we also have some pretty old green roofs in the US. So for example, on top of Rockefeller Center, there's a 100-year-old green roof. And they're becoming increasingly common. Here's some data from the Trade Association Green Roofs for Healthy Cities, showing all the new square feet of green roof that were installed in 2011. And I think the reason why green roofs are becoming increasingly popular is because they address that urban stream syndrome while also providing multiple ecosystem services. So it's been estimated by Ryerson University that a green roof will double your roof life. Some work has been done on energy savings. Green roofs most likely keep your buildings cooler in the summer. The jury is still out about whether or not they work in the winter as well. They provide habitat and green space, possibly improve air quality, and there's some new research on this green roof here at the Queen's Botanical Garden investigating whether or not it can even serve as a sound buffer. But my interest and the focus of this talk is on how green roofs contribute to stormwater management. So we know a lot already about how green roofs can hold stormwater, but a lot of what we know comes from research in Europe where they have different climates. So here's a study by Mentens in 2006 in Belgium, and he's showing on the x-axis annual precipitation in millimeters. And he found that there's a direct relationship between that and annual runoff, which is not surprising. You can see, does this have a pointer at all, this little flippy thing? You can see the dotted line showing the runoff that you would expect from a traditional roof. And you can see that even just covering the roof with gravel will improve your ability to hold precipitation. But a 50 millimeter green roof or even a 350 millimeter green roof is going to reduce runoff a lot more. And so based on relationships like these, I think people have become more optimistic about green roof installation in the US. But we still have a lot to learn about how to design these systems most effectively for our varying climates. And one question about design that is debated in the literature is whether or not the plants play a role in stormwater retention. So, for example, look at the study by Van Wert in 2005. They looked at little green roof modules, and they were comparing gravel roofs to vegetated green roofs to unvegetated green roofs. And you can see when they broke out their findings for light, medium, and heavy rainstorms, they didn't really see a difference in retention percentage comparing vegetated to non-vegetated green roofs. Only when they merged their data all together did they see a difference between these two treatments. And if you look over there in that fourth bar chart or bar column, that difference wasn't even really that great. But in contrast, other laboratory studies have showed the effects of transpiration to be as high as 40% of total water loss, have shown plants to have an effect on water loss as high as 40%. And here's another study by Dunnett in 2008 showing that there's definitely a relationship between the amount of runoff you would find in an experimental green roof and the height of the plants that are on it. So we've got some conflicting results reported here, and a great opportunity to look at this question in a little more detail. So one of the major questions in my dissertation research is, how can variation in green roof plant performance be explained? And our working hypothesis is that plants probably have a great potential to contribute to green roof water storage through all sorts of ways, like interception or root acquisition of water or evapotranspiration. But you have to look at this potential in the context of physiological constraints of the different species and as well as your climate. So we set out to test this hypothesis in Maryland by building 16 experimental green roof platforms. And I'd like to take the chance here really quickly just to thank the Chesapeake Center for Youth Development, who were very instrumental in getting these platforms put together and installed in 2010. We instrumented the platforms with Decagon sensors. We're using the EM50 radio loggers to track moisture content in all of these platforms. And we're also measuring runoff from the platforms with rain gauges that you can see in that little photo insert. We're also taking measurements about our environment. So we're monitoring wind speed, air temperature, solar radiation, relative humidity, and of course we're also measuring rain at our site. And one other thing I should have mentioned earlier is that each of these 16 platforms are replicates of 4 different treatments. My treatments include an unplanted platform, as well as platforms planted in Sedum album, Sedum sexangulaire, and Sedum kamchaticum that you can see there in the foreground. And the great thing about that EM50 radio logger for my purposes is that it allows the data to be transmitted in real time in places that are away from the green roof. And this would be even more important if I was taking the measurements from an actual green roof, where sometimes access is a little tricky. So I just wanted to mention that here. And these sites are also, and we're monitoring the plants on each of these platforms very carefully. So we're taking measurements of plant coverage, root biomass. And so the data analysis is still underway for this project, but we do have preliminary results for 2011. What I'm showing you here is that we definitely saw less runoff from our planted platforms compared to our unplanted platforms. However, we weren't able to see a statistically significant difference in this amount of runoff. But I don't think that's because we don't have a treatment effect. I think it is because of how we're analyzing the data statistically. So I'll show you what I mean here in this next slide. In August of 2011, we had a tropical storm, Irene, where we had, I think it was above 6 inches of rain. I think we got 80 millimeters. And you can see that green roofs, that there was no treatment effect during that storm. And in fact, I imagine that there wasn't even really a large green roof effect because we just got swamped by all this water. And so when I gave you those annual totals earlier, I was combining data from storms like this with data from storms like this one, a nice 0.3-inch storm on October 3rd. And here you can see that the platforms planted with Sedum kamchaticum definitely outperformed those planted in album and those unplanted. And even Sedum sexangulaire outperformed the unplanted platform for this storm. And those differences seem small, but remember, my platforms are only 16 square feet. So if you scale those 3 liters of water up to the size of a big industrial roof, you can see that that could add up over larger areas. And so that the plants may be affecting the function of green roofs with respect to stormwater retention. And so in statistics, when you have a confounding variable, an effect that you think is swamping your treatment effect, so like for example, the storm size, in my case, seems to be swamping my plant treatment effect. One thing you can run is a statistical test called an ANCOVA. So that's what I did here. I'm graphing, it's kind of a mix between a regression and an ANOVA. And I'm showing you the relationship between storm size and runoff. And I can tell you that, and so what you're wanting to compare here is the slope of these lines for the different treatments. And I can tell you that the slope of that pink line showing our unplanted platforms, representative of our unplanted platforms, is different than the slope of the yellow line representing those platforms planted in sedum kamchaticum. And that tells us that this treatment is having a significant effect on stormwater retention. So to conclude, it seems like sedum kamchaticum is, compared to some of the other species, may be a plant species of choice, but we need to go back and confirm that with more experiments. We're going to continue to monitor and analyze these data. In any case, it definitely seems like there is also a plant treatment effect. We're going to explore new ways to account for the influence of storm size on all of our treatment effects. But what is also very exciting is that we can now use this data to calibrate a mechanistic model of the green roof water cycle. So here's a conceptual diagram of how you might understand a mechanistic model of the green roof water cycle. If you focus in mostly on that center box that says substrate moisture content, you can imagine that that moisture content is going to be influenced mostly by the size of the storm or the amount of water entering your green roof. Now, that moisture content is, after it rains, that moisture content is then going to be dictated by whether or not there was runoff from the green roof, and then a couple days out, it's also going to be influenced by whether or not there was evapotranspiration and how fast that evapotranspiration occurred. And as we know, evapotranspiration is kind of elusive to model, but you can predict it if you know a lot about your environment and you know a lot about your plants. And so from that previous experiment that I was describing, we were able to take a first stab at parameterizing this conceptual model. So in this next slide, I'm just going to show you some preliminary results from that. And you could predict runoff from a green roof, or using a green roof model, either directly or also indirectly if you know what your moisture content is. And so we really, one way to look at the model results is to ask yourself if the model is predicting moisture content correctly. So that's what we're really trying to hone in on in this graph is, was the model able to predict moisture content of the green roof substrate? And so that's what I'm showing you on the y-axis. I'm showing you in the orange and red and yellow actual measured moisture content from those experimental green roof platforms. And in the dark blue, I'm showing you the predicted moisture content of a green roof. And I neglected to mention, I think what's really responsible for us being able to predict that is the equation that we chose for evapotranspiration, and that was the FAO version of the Penman-Monteith equation. I'd be happy to answer any questions or get in touch with people about the details of how we put this model all together. But suffice it to say, this was a pretty good first stab at predicting moisture content, and we're going to be continuing to refine this model and validate it for other green roofs. So we're going to continue to model green roof performance, especially for different storm and climate scenarios. And we're going to use prior experiments to explain instances where the model just doesn't quite work. And we'll possibly be comparing these model predictions with a real green roof. Just very quickly, nearby college from where I'm doing this research decided to do a dorm renovation, and I convinced them to install a small section of their roof as green roof. And you can see it going in here. That's the big crane loading the substrate up onto the roof. And this is what it looked like shortly after we put the plants in. And I'm monitoring this green roof with a weir. I've got in the center of the green roof, that's the drain, that's the roof drain. And that roof drain water leads through a pipe down into a closet on the first floor of the dorm, where we have these weirs installed. And through monitoring the height of water as it passes over a V notch, I can understand how much water is coming off of this green roof, and hopefully we'll be able to predict how much water is coming off with our green roof model. And so I would like to thank all of the people who've helped me and sponsors of my research. And I would also especially like to thank Decagon for hosting me here today. And I would love to take any questions. Also, if you want, I try to update my blog that I keep about my own personal research. If anyone's interested, that's the address. So thank you very much.